and welcome to this session on how AI can scale retention via personalization. So there's quite a lot to unpack just in that title. So before diving into the slides, let's spend a few minutes thinking about what the title is going to cover. So the focus of this session and this masterclass today is on engagement and retention. Retention obviously is the opposite of churn. And so when we think about churn, there are a number of factors that drive churn, which we'll cover as we go through the slides. But the key point is that most of those factors are fixed in the short term. There's very little we can do over, for example, the current financial period. But one factor in particular does allow us to vary things in that particular time frame, and that's personalization. And so as we talk through these slides, we'll cover the relationship between engagement and personalization and how the user experience can really help to drive that. But we'll also see that the key challenge with that is that as we scale up and try to bring more and more elements of personalization in, we hit a challenge in terms of processing those data points. And that is where AI and machine learning techniques can really help us. So if retention is the opposite of churn, why do users churn? So many of the points on this slide probably feel a bit self-explanatory, but it's sometimes worth just setting out a framework to categorize and set the context. So looking around the model here, cost. Clearly, if a service is perceived by users as being too expensive relative to the value of the content that they are viewing, then that's quite quickly going to motivate the user to churn. And the end of offer is quite closely related to that in the sense that many users sign up to some kind of introductory offer. So next up is lack of content. And again, if a user can't find something to watch, they're quite quickly going to disengage from the service and reach for that churn button. And finally, quality of experience. So the perceived quality of the service relative to the amount of money they're paying is another key driver as to the engagement of the user. So if the quality in terms of the video streaming quality or the interface and how the user engages with the service falls below what they perceive as the acceptable threshold, that again is going to drive them to churn. But there's one factor that's different, and that's the user experience. And the reason it's different is that the first four factors are things that we can't really vary over the short term. Factors like the content budget, they're fixed typically for the current financial period at least. Whereas the user experience is something that we can really change and influence on a very quick basis. We can make tests, we can change factors in the user experience and quite quickly get feedback on that. And these are all things that can be done over the short term. So how does the user experience help us drive engagement? Now, to be clear, I'm talking about drivers of engagement here rather than measures of engagement. When we talked about and discussed this session beforehand, there were a number of times the conversation got distracted by measures of engagement. So, for example, I'm talking time spent watching and the completion rates of shows. The ways in which the user interface can drive, the user experience can drive engagement is set by the framework of the 6 points to the side of the slide. So the first of those is UI personalization. And here what we're describing is any way in which the user's usage of the service changes the way we are presenting that service to the user. So primarily that means things like bookmarks, it means things like watch lists, but also personas. I'm sure everyone here is familiar with when you log on to Disney or Netflix, for example, you are presented with a selection of personas to choose from, and that gives the service the ability to personalize around the individual user rather than just a household account. So next up is recommendations, and we tend to get trapped into thinking about recommendations just in terms of you watched X, so you might like Y rails in the user interface. But in practice, it covers a much broader scope. So recommendations can be algorithmic as well as editorial. They can also cover and extend not just within the user interface, but also external to that. So perhaps push notifications to a mobile device or an email campaign surrounding a particular piece of content. So the next two, be where your audiences are and video experience, are very much focused on personalizing the consumption of that service. So ensuring that the service is available on the time and on the device and in the place that the user wants to consume it. And also ensuring that the service is personalized to the way in which the user wants to view the content. So if they want to view it socially via a watch party, the focus is enabling them to do so. Next up, real-time engagement. I'm sure everyone here has used or is familiar with a service that uses concepts like badges, achievements, and loyalty points, for example, in order to drive engagement with the service. And they're really powerful factors. And finally, customer relationship management, CRM. So this is all the ways, all of the touch points we have with end users where we can use personalization to make the user feel special. For example, via happy birthday messages or anniversary of joining offers. So we have a framework for personalization, and I've deliberately drawn that net very wide, cast that net very wide around the many ways in which the user interface can be personalized. And so to try to simplify that, we've categorized things in terms of content, offer, and presentation personalizations. But the challenge with all of these is delivering this efficiently, accurately, and at scale. And the reason for that is that the more ways in which we personalize drives increased engagement, but it also increases greatly the number of data points that we're trying to process in order to personalize the service. And that is what creates the scale challenge. And the argument we're making here is that that scale challenge can really be effectively addressed by artificial intelligence and machine learning techniques. So we believe that AI is going to impact every element of the workflow, and we've categorized things here into connect, engage, and monetize. So connect is about making those connections between consumers and the content they love. And we've talked about recommendations, that will be content discovery, but it covers a number of other use cases. So for example, smart thumbnails. I'm sure everyone here is familiar with the lengths to which Netflix goes in order to personalize the thumbnails in order to choose the most effective thumbnail to entice users in to watch the content. But that clearly is a scaling challenge. There are many different types of user, there's many potential thumbnails, and the scaling of the A/B testing needed to choose the best one for each situation is something that can really only be scaled with AI. So engage, that's clearly the focus of the session today. We've talked about various engagement use cases. There's several listed here. Sports highlights, for example, is using AI to process an overall event into an additional viewable VOD asset. So for example, we can take an entire sports event, turn that using AI into a highlights package, and that can be used to perhaps syndicate to social media or perhaps to entice casual fans into viewing the sports content and perhaps upselling to an additional package. And all of those touch points are helping to drive increased engagement. And so then finally, monetization. It might seem a bit odd to draw a line between retention and monetization, but the point is that with many services looking to advertising to supplement or replace subscription revenues, then monetization becomes a really important place in which AI can help drive engagement. The challenge with advertising strategies is ensuring the advertising is done in a way that isn't intrusive for the end user. I'm sure you've all come across services where the ad break has been inserted at a really inopportune moment, sometimes mid-sentence, for example. And the reason for that is that we are trying to insert ads into content that wasn't prepared in advance with advertising in mind, and so it doesn't have the ad break markers already inserted into the content. Trying to process all of that back catalog and insert those ad markers is something that, again, is a scale challenge, and it's something that AI can really help us achieve. So, excuse me just for 1 second to look at our approach to this. We have a product called Video AI, and we structure this in a very workflow-centric model. So we have a selection of detectors that is part of the workflow that processes the content to produce actionable metadata, and that actionable metadata can be consumed by the algorithms in order to answer questions. And those questions can be answered within the workflow, perhaps via the sports highlights example, but can also be passed downstream to other entities in order to enhance what can be done there. So, for example, with contextual advertising or enhanced recommendations. So here's an example of video AI in action in a content-centric perspective. We're processing a number of data points here relevant to this particular piece of content, so we can get a view on the type of content from an emotion perspective. Is it happy? Is it sad content? We can see a much more in-depth description of the metadata associated with that content, the kind of objects featured within the content. And all of this provides a much richer set of metadata that can be passed downstream to, for example, a recommendations algorithm. So to try to summarize then, the point we're making here is that personalization drives engagement and engagement drives retention. Personalization extends far beyond just content recommendations. We've shown a much broader framework for personalization. That framework includes content, offer, and presentation personalizations. However, the key challenge that we've highlighted is how to deliver that efficiently, accurately, and at scale. And the way we suggest to approach that is artificial intelligence and machine learning techniques, which will really help bring the scale and drive these UX and personalization-based retention strategies to the next level. Thank you very much.